So our first speaker is Jim Delgado. There you are. Hiding. He's the, besides being the hero in the room, everybody is really very aware of Jim's work. And he is the Director of Maritime Heritage in NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. His 4-decade-long career has included a 13-year tenure with the National Park Service, including serving as the service's maritime historian. His interest in maritime history and archaeology has remained a constant passion and focus, and his favorite maritime sites and subjects remain the next ones he'll encounter. Jim?
Thank you. For us in Sanctuaries, being one of those places where we hope to be the pointy end of the spear, or where the rubber meets the road with the MPA Center's white page, has meant an interesting journey, particularly in dealing in a system which is largely defined by a sense that it is natural resource based in that other view, with only a few maritime heritage sites. And indeed, one of the biggest concepts of all that we've had to grapple with was the sense, well, we don't have shipwrecks, therefore we have no maritime heritage in our sanctuary. I think we've evolved through that, and in particular now we've started to apply this in a couple of ways. We've yet to actually do a National Register nomination for a maritime cultural landscape. We continue to do sites or districts, but we've started to line things up so that when and if the time comes, we can start looking at it through that lens, applying criteria, and if not actually writing nominations, then at least preparing stuff, pulling it together in a way that can serve as the basic source that we will then mine for Section 106 or 110 consultations, as the opportunity to use this for developing historic resource studies or archaeological resource studies, and also, I think, in large part as well, to mine as part of the ongoing message that we present to the public. What I'd like to do is, rather than talk generally about how MHP and NOAA uses MCL, I'm going to run really quickly through an exercise we did recently to support the expansion, knock on wood, of USS Monitor National Marine Sanctuary out there off the North Carolina coast in an area known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. This is a rather important area when you look at the history not only of the United States, but global, maritime, culture, history, you name it. The world converged on this place in large part, not just because there's a group of barrier islands, but because it's a key spot on an ocean highway. The Gulf Stream has been and remains a very powerful presence there. But as well, this has been a place that people have gathered, encountered, and used for millennia. In looking at this place, of course, being NOAA, we started way up in space with satellites, but then began to zoom down, looking at it in the micro scale, but starting with the macro scale, and in particular how these barrier islands surrounded by water are a maritime landscape in every way, shape, and form. From space down to the perspective that you have from a small craft or standing on the beach. All of this is key. What's also key is that it's an evolving, changing landscape, not only in terms of sea level rise from the last post-glacial maximum, when that plain most definitely was inhabited by people, but also as a landscape that has continued to change dramatically in our own time. Whether you map that through changes in inlets and the effects of the environment as well as the culture, or whether you look at that in terms of the ongoing ways by which humanity has responded to those changes. Constructing bridges, adding ferry systems, building settlements in and around key inlets, and then abandoning them as those inlets closed and a new inlet opened. All of that part and parcel of that experience and of that human interaction in this landscape. And as well, the consequences of not heeding what happens in that landscape. And with that as well, ultimately a view that in time, given what's happening to the environment, the Outer Banks will, to a certain extent, disappear, if you will, from most people's perspective, or perhaps from most people's minds, out of the landscape, as certainly houses and roads have washed away. But I can assure you of this, for each and every person who has an ancestral tie to those Outer Banks, they will never disappear, just as the islands of Kiribati and every other nation in the Pacific will not disappear from the collective cultural memory or the maritime cultural landscape of the peoples out there. Of course, it starts with ancestors, it starts with traditional uses, but indeed, as we began to assess this, and as we developed our first document in the system that looked at the MCL, the key thing was not to relegate ancestral indigenous people to merely being there in the past. To recognize, of course, that these are people who have been there for a long time, people that still persist to this day and are actively involved, and we find this throughout our system. I certainly got that years ago working and living in the Pacific Northwest, where the large portion of the fishing community remained the people who'd been fishing there for thousands of years. As well, I think the other thing that we looked at is how much this area, particularly in and around the Outer Banks, had been ground zero for a number of folks with cultural contact that came as a result of that maritime highway. And how that perceived world encountered by Europeans was not only depicted and charted and mapped, but became a center of their activities in the colonial era, again driven by ships and trade, and ultimately in the establishment of settlements and communities. In looking at the maritime cultural landscape out there, what we've ended up doing is incorporating a sense of each and every maritime community such as it is, be it a Smith Island on Chesapeake Bay, but also communities like Bath or Beaufort, and how these people have interacted with and used that landscape, be it the construction of board walkways and in the shallows of the sounds, be it in the construction of large hotels, be it in the windmills that take advantage of the natural ocean environment. All of that, key elements. And, of course, remaining key is the fact that over time, that landscape settled, occupied, became a center point for tourism, for development, a national seashore, ultimately a national marine sanctuary off those shores, a very small one, centered on one iconic Civil War shipwreck, but also for large numbers of people who came there in the true meaning of recreation to recreate themselves in that unique ocean environment, and to this day still use it and interact with it. And a fascinating concept for us as well, particularly given the point of view that we have in certain areas of our system, that all of these uses can be described and talked about, and you can do so without placing a value judgment on it. It's a very fascinating thing for me, therefore, to be addressing this issue with some of our superintendents, not here but elsewhere, when we talk about the ocean energy environment and things like offshore oil drilling and platforms. Key, important elements in the maritime cultural landscape going way back in terms of how we as humans have harvested energy from the sea. You can talk about such things without throwing rocks at them, and I will say that that certainly helps us not only in our discussions with our colleagues in Bohm and Bessie, but also with the oil and gas industry with whom we must work in the Gulf. Indeed, as we've looked at the maritime cultural landscape in and around North Carolina, it's also been key for us to engage with those communities there who might see us as a threat in closing off and building a fence around a vast area of the ocean. Having a document that speaks to their ongoing use, nay, beach driving, beach campfires, fishing, recreational fishing, commercial fishing, all of that has absolutely been key. And again, with NOAA developing a document that speaks to this ongoing cultural tradition that is non-judgmental. We would be remiss, however, if we did not point out things like the size of those fish at Oregon Inlet and talk about the size of fish being caught today. We talk about elements that are iconic, that speak to people, that in putting into a maritime cultural landscape document for a sanctuary does not mean that we're trying to stake a claim or say, hey, we own a piece of that. Not at all. But rather that they are all interconnected. Whether they're the iconic lighthouses, some of which are in the national seashores, or elements that no longer exist, or they're simply on the landscape or in the memory, such as the lightships, or in the case of Diamond Shoals, the actual wreck itself, or the now abandoned Texas Towers. We talk about fortifications and how the Ocean Highway made this area a key area to be defended. We talk about seacoast fortifications throughout all periods of history, from prehistoric times and palisades all the way up to the modern era. And of course, we do talk about these things as well. not only offshore, but where they crashed ashore on the beaches, and indeed where that was responded to by the United States Life-Saving Service, later the Coast Guard. All key interrelated elements on this highway of the sea, and an ongoing activity. And again, why do my bosses like it? Because it also links them powerfully with another partner, the Coast Guard, with whom we collaborate, not only in terms of cultural resources, but in enforcement actions out there, if need be. I guess in a sense, as it is with other communities, hopefully what these documents show is that we get it to a certain extent and are interested in more dialogue. That, of course, also includes shipwreck remains on beaches that are still there in the boundaries of the national park, and shipwrecks that are no longer there. Anna and I were just talking on the flight in about shipwrecks on the landscape that got away. And as an archaeologist, it took me a long time to realize in the maritime cultural landscape, it's not just the wrecks that are there that have left their tangible bones. It's the ones that crashed ashore and got pulled off and maybe have left nothing but a powerful memory or an iconic photograph, but which are part and parcel of the story and of the landscape. And of battles fought and perhaps not so tangible, but also key and important, all the way down to even things like the placement of ships in the bombardment of Fort Fisher. And then, of course, the iconic wreck that led to the creation of the first National Marine Sanctuary, USS Monitor. It's not alone. There are other Civil War wrecks out there that speak to this. And, of course, then there is the ongoing battlefield that Joe Hoyt will talk about later, which has its own elements ashore as well as out in the water, and is an active part of ongoing diving. Underwater archaeology, in and by itself, is also a key part of that landscape, not only in terms of what has happened in the past with iconic projects, be they Monitor or Queen Anne's Revenge or others, but what happens today in which the archaeological resources, as they are, help inform and inspire, and how elements of that landscape include places like East Carolina University, known to several in the room, and its ongoing role in dealing with all of that out there, and of course then the Mariners Museum and home of the Monitor Center. I want to close with one other aspect that has helped us, and that is that being NOAA and being an agency which has an ancestry that goes back to the Coast Survey, we have access to a wide range of documentation, and that includes the original Coast Survey charts, not only those published, and there are a wide range of them that document the landscape, as I said, all the way down to where the ships were when they were battering Fort Fisher, but also manuscript charts that also speak to other elements, whether they're documenting the presence of a Civil War shipwreck or several, or manuscript charts such as these that grapple with every aspect that you will only find archivally, and now thanks to the NOAA Central Library and the work of Skip Taberge and John Cloud, are digitized and available. In particular, the T-sheets that speak to the Coast Survey have been a powerful resource for us, and we intend to use these and share these with any and all partners, and indeed in North Carolina, to be able to come up with this drawing, if you will, not just of the mouth of the Cape Fear, but the actual blockade running port to which all of these vessels would wait once they cleared through, got past the blockading fleet. That little landscape, that portion of the landscape, documented there. And indeed, other elements like the historic oyster beds, also documented in manuscript form, which also helps inform the natural resource managers in terms of where oysters were, where they're not anymore, and we're even using that same approach in California because the Coast Survey, a most anal bunch of Germans, actually documented each and every kelp bed. And so in this way and in this fashion, we're helping use these documents to drive our own maritime cultural landscape look at the banks, at the graveyard of the Pacific, at the industries, and at the people. And most particularly with that, I will close by saying that for us the most critical element has been and will remain engagement with the public and with each other. The only way I think we're going to move forward on all of this is not only to help define it and to categorize it and figure out how to use what we can in the existing toolkit, it is to pull together, as many of us have and as many of us continue to need to do, collaboratively and together. No one agency, no one group, no one CRM firm, no one practitioner is going to get us through this. Together, I think we can come up with something that sounds to me to be probably the next best great idea in cultural resources management. Thank you.